All right. Hey, so we don't usually get to do Friday Farms over the summer. I am thrilled because John Zimmer is here and he's on campus, and I've known John since Hurricane Katrina. Just a great, great guy. And we were walking around campus talking, and he was saying, "Oh, I wish I could tell students these things." And we're going to give him the opportunity to do that. So, John, welcome to campus.
Thank you very much. Good to be
So,
back.
just brief introduction of yourself. I can tell you're a 1972 graduate. You played baseball here. You had a great story. Why do you tell like just who you are?
Well, first I'll talk about my career here at St. Bonaventure. I think, first of all, I did go to school here. I was a math major. And in between studying, I lettered 3 years in varsity baseball and 3 years in varsity soccer. And I wouldn't have missed that opportunity for all the world. I mean, it was an opportunity to play, at a Division I level. After graduating, I had a 2-year military commitment, through ROTC. And after that, I student taught my last year here at St. Bonaventure. And after I fulfilled my military commitment, I think maybe a teaching career was probably not the right place for me. The only thing I regret is my math major. I took very few business courses, and I know that would have helped me because I ended up in business. I worked about 25 years for the Mobil Corporation, and then another 7 or 8 years for the Exxon-Mobil Corporation. And at the age of 56, I decided it was time to do something else. So I started my own consulting business, and I ran that fairly well for about 10 more years before I decided to really retire.
Very cool. So I guess just starting out, I mean, you were going to be a teacher when you were a senior. What did you think you were going to be? If you had to guess as a senior, what was your future going to be?
If I had to guess, I think I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Now, again, I had basically a 2-year no-cut job. So there was no interviewing for the military. You were in after you passed basic training. I think I tried teaching. I'm not so sure that I had a real burning desire to be a teacher. No reflection on Dr. Mahar. But I think going into business and the different jobs that I had with Mobil Oil and Exxon-Mobil, was just the right place for me.
So before you get there, let's talk a little about Bonas. I do want to get into the whole business and what you did and all that, which is fascinating. You made it fascinating. But let's talk baseball and soccer. It's unusual to be playing 2 sports at the same time.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe had I not played 2 sports, maybe my marks would have reflected some higher marks. But again, they were good enough so I could graduate. And after I exited the military, which played played into my hiring with the Mobil Corporation. I think it was the right thing to do.
So let's do baseball because I like baseball a little better. So,
Yep.
What position? Where did you play? What did you do?
I was the last graduating class, 1972, that freshmen by NCAA rules could not play varsity sports.
Okay.
That, of course, is all done now. So my sophomore year, I'm competing not only against upperclassmen, but now I have these hotshot freshmen that are coming in now that I have to compete against. And again, my goal was, number one, to make the team, and number two, be in the starting lineup, which I ultimately did. Interesting though, when you come out of high school and you played very well, you were up very high in the batting order. My first game at St. Bonaventure, I was number 7 in the batting order. I've never hit that low in my life. But there's another Bonn alumni, graduated like 6 years before me, that was my JV baseball coach in high school. He told me 2 things. He said, "You don't open your mouth." He said, "You speak volumes with your bat and your glove, and once you speak loudly with those, then you feel free to open your mouth." So I kept my mouth shut, and I think it took me about 4 or 5 games to move into the number 4 spot, and that's where I was for 3 years.
Okay.
Very enjoyable.
First base?
And I was I tell people I was the best first baseman on a lot of teams that played in left field a lot. They tried, anytime you were trying to, quote, hide somebody, you put them at first base because, everybody always throws the ball to you, let her high, and it's a very easy position, which aggravated me. But again, my goal was to be in the starting lineup whether it was at first base or in the outfield, didn't matter to me.
And soccer, how did you get into soccer? Did you play soccer in high school?
I played club soccer from the time I was about 12. I was an oddity back then.
Okay.
In Rochester, New York, there was a big team, a league of Italian Americans, German Americans, Ukrainian Americans, and they all had junior teams. And so I was, I learned my skills at that age. So when I came to St. Bonaventure, I wasn't an ex-football player, trying to figure out, how to not toe kick the ball, So I started playing soccer only because there was a freshman team. Again, you go back to that, freshmen could not play varsity sports. So I had to do something. I just couldn't study, So that's how I started my soccer career. Junior year, and I played in the backfield, defensive backfield. Junior year, I was injured in the second or third week of practice, tore up my knee, my ankle, and Dick Gelati was our trainer, a member of the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Dick worked hard on me to get me back in shape. He did after 30 days. By the time I came back, I'd lost my position. So I was used to playing 80 out of 90 minutes. Now I'm playing like 10 out of 90. So I went to the coach, told him I was not a good cheerleader on the bench. I want to try a different position. And he allowed me to try out at like the center striker inside.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And it took a while for me to get the hang of it, but I did. And eventually he paired me with another underclassman, and the chemistry was great. And eventually we ended up in the starting lineup. Nice. And that was the year that we went out to Columbus and beat Ohio State.
You beat Ohio State.
And I had one of those games where they said the ball always bounces for the Bonnies. I had the 3-goal performance. We beat Ohio State 3-2.
Wait. So stop. So you had 3 goals against Ohio State.
That was my probably one and only claim to fame here.
Wow. That's great. Spectacular. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were a math major. You were playing multiple sports. You were a teacher. You were in ROTC. Did you sleep?
In between, I was the president of the Men's Intramural Council my junior year, and that was probably an unpaid, part-time job.
Okay.
Scheduling for 11 dorm floors and about 30 different sports. We played every sport anybody wanted to.
So you were saying that in the military. Well, let's do that fast. What did you do in the military?
Military, after I finished all my basic training, I was assigned to they called the Ballistic Research Laboratories in Aberdeen Proving Grounds. They developed the bullets and guns for the military.
Okay. You weren't the target?
No. Okay. No.
That would have been my job.
And because I had a math degree, I think they thought maybe I could be working various math computations and whatever.
Okay.
Thank goodness I was working for a commanding officer that offered me a job as a project manager out in New Mexico. So I became a project manager. And interesting, you probably talk about managing without authority. I'm a young second lieutenant having to give kind of direction to captains and majors. Majors, not so bad. Captains were pretty snotty when a second lieutenant was trying to give them directions.
Yeah.
Okay. And I tried to do it in a good way, but I learned a lot about managing without authority. Then eventually they built a cadre of senior offers to me, and then that issue went away.
So what did you? A lot of people managing without authority. What can you tell people that me? Tell me.
I can't tell you anything was classified.
Oh no, but okay. What could what could I learn? What could I learn to how could I be a better leader without the title?
Well, I think 2 things. You got to recognize that there's people that are smarter than you. Okay?
Clearly, in my case,
regardless of how many stripes you're wearing on your arm, there are younger people or junior people that are probably smarter than you. Okay. Then you have junior people that maybe aren't so smart. Okay. Or let's just say less smart. And you kind of have to work with them and bring them along. We had a lot of young enlisted troops that were, my job was to make sure, number one, the project got completed, but nobody got hurt. We were in a range situation where people were shooting them up and things like that. Okay. So my job with the younger troops was just to make sure that they, in some cases, didn't play with rattlesnakes in the desert and things like that. Okay.
Gotcha.
But to do it in a nice way,
Yeah.
because I was not their commanding officer.
Yeah.
They were kind of attached to me, and I was trying to run things and keep it safe.
So one thing that I seem to find fairly regularly that might be somewhat similar is that you're dealing with predominantly young males, I would guess. And overconfidence bias is a real thing, and everyone thinking that they can do anything and jump through any wall, and et cetera, et cetera. So how do you deal with that in the military
Well,
or in life in general? Like,
probably some of my commanding officers were asking the same question about me,
okay, true.
when I started. But again, you don't learn to manage is a bad word, to interface with people without making some mistakes.
Sure.
And I'm sure I made some mistakes, particularly with some of these, I'll call them snotty captains that, I had to kind of, give some direction to. So it's something you learn, I think, along the way.
Okay.
You never get it right, I don't think.
Better not perfect.
Because people are different, and we're all products of the people that we were, I'll say, groomed with.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to kind of watch that kind of a bias, particularly with Gen Xers and Gen Zers and all those other people. I mean, you see some videos of how you deal with it, and you got to do it differently.
Yeah.
Because there's some people like me that were like the firstborn son, and military and very kind of, in many words, regimented.
Yeah.
You got to kind of watch that, because a lot of people don't buy that routine anymore. Now, having said that, I was hired with the Mobil Corporation after they interviewed me with a number of junior military officers, Air Force, Army, okay, and a number of the superior officers at Mobil were not only military, they were academy graduates. West Point.
Yeah, more regimented.
And still, I see West Point graduates and Annapolis graduates are still very well thought of, regardless of this mindset that they are, too regimented for this team concept of solving problems. That routine.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you get out of the military. What's next?
Next, I needed to get a job.
Okay.
Because I spent about 1 week in the unemployment line, and I said I can't do this. And my only other job, my only job offer, I had not been interviewed by Mobil yet, was with Kmart.
Okay.
In Orchard Park.
Oh, really?
Yes. Working in a women's clothes department. So
okay.
I said, okay. And at that point, I said, well, $700 a month is better than nothing. And when I asked them, I said, what kind of a moving policy they had, because I was living in Rochester, they said, oh, you wouldn't commute from Rochester to Orchard Park? And at that point I said, okay, but I still thought about it. And my mother had to call me aside and said, will you please do the math? You're getting paid X number of dollars on unemployment, and they're going to pay you less, and they want you to commute. She said, I don't think that'll be an opportunity for it. And in the meantime, I got a phone call from Exxon, and it was a second interview, because I'd done an interview down in their Valley Forge, Pennsylvania office, and apparently it didn't go well. So they said they were forwarding my paperwork to the New York office, and I'd gotten a lot of letters from the Fortune 500. The letter says basically, although your credentials are indeed impressive, we don't see a good fit for you. But when I got the interview with the second interview, it was the real deal.
And doing what?
It was an operations job. They were hiring basically line supervisors to manage union covered people in their trucking terminals.
Okay.
Which
out of where? Where were you working out
of? My first job was in the last place an upstate kid would want to work, Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
Night shift, weekends. Okay. It was interesting though. We just got, my wife and I, who graduated in '74, we just gotten married in '75. But there were really no adjustments to marriage because we worked different schedules. I worked Wednesday to Thursday, Friday night, Wednesday to Sunday, Saturday, Friday night till 5 in, and she worked days. So we're kind of like ships passing.
I'm sure Ann was happy. No,
but
joking.
again, that was kind of like that was the confidence course. If you survive the night shift, because you were the only supervisor on duty. And I was always taught as a junior officer, you handled everything at your level, and you only escalated something to your boss if you could handle. And I said I was not going to wake my boss up at 2 in. So, that job lasted about probably a year and a half. And I'll tell you, I got hired the beginning of '75, and in 75. And in 87, I was in the headquarters in Fairfax, Virginia, having moved through jobs in Brooklyn, Portland, Maine, Boston, Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, Newburgh, New York, New Haven, Connecticut, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So it was
You
like,
moved a lot.
and they told me that when I got hired, that if, in so many words, if you kept your nose clean, did a good job, you better be ready to move every year, 18 months. And it was always different jobs or more responsibility.
Wow. So
And then you move into headquarters, and of course, that opens up a whole different spectrum of jobs.
okay. And when you got to headquarters, what did you end up doing?
I moved in there as an environmental compliance job. That was a job you needed to get, and I'll call it getting your tickets punched with an oil company. You had to understand the rules on waste management, clean water, and all that kind of stuff. So you had to do that if you were going on to manage a major facility. So I did that job for, I think, a year and a half, and then I moved into a transportation job, and I got called in by a division general manager, which was close to a vice president. And all he said was, "We're going to send you up to the supply department. We want to see if somebody else can look at you and tell us you're as good as we think you are." So apparently I did okay.
I guess so.
And then I moved into that job, and I was doing transportation contracting for the U.S. I say me and a group of about a dozen people. But again, my job there was I was told by my boss, he wanted to bring different people in there with different experiences from the chemical division, from the exploration. And my job was to basically teach them how to negotiate with New York City truckers, teach them that, give them a little philosophy on how one was to behave and negotiate with people in general, and then move them out into a bigger job. That was my job. I was told by my boss I had 30% of my discretionary time on career development to bring in new people, get them squared away, and move them out.
So career development just brings me to another. You had mentioned when we were up front out here that one of the things you did was interview people, and they sent you to take courses on interviewing. And...
Yeah, I did. They sent us to interviewer training. It was conducted by professional interviewers, and they talked about how one interviews. You just don't go and interview and have a random discussion. We talked about what kind of management competencies or business practices do you want to see in the people you're hiring for the position that you have open.
So you have a list of things that you want.
I've got a checklist of maybe, say, 24 items.
Right.
And when I was counseling people to interview, my other interviewers, because I interviewed as a team separately, I didn't gang interview.
Right.
We would look at the 4 or 5 competencies, whether it was analytical skills, interpersonal skills, negotiating skills, that kind of stuff. And we'd flag 4 or 5, and I'd tell my co-interviewers, we will interview against those 4 or 5 competencies. If they don't demonstrate those, they're out. And another thing I did, and I was new to this department, and I was kind of an outsider in this transportation group. And I said, after we get through, we're going to fill out the paperwork. You're going to rank these 3 candidates, because they interviewed 3. You're going to rank them 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to get together, and I'm going to add up those numbers, and the low score wins. And they looked at me kind of like, I said, well, think about it. I said, there's only one circumstance where there could be a tie, I think, in the different combinations of numbers. So once that's the way we interview people.
So I guess one thing you said out there, and it comes to this point, is like, you have an interview, I don't know, 30 minutes, however long it is.
40 minutes.
40 minutes. Okay, 40 minutes.
Yep.
How do you look at those 4 things that they need in an interview process? And I think for the students that this is something like, if I'm going for a job, how can I get myself across in 30, 40 minutes?
Yeah. Okay. Again, I told you my interviews with Mobil, the first one I was told the interview was very poor.
You're right. You said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We were not coached on how to interview.
Okay.
Nor writing resumes. We had this laundry list, and you send it in. I think we were counseled when we did our interviewer training to interview the proper way, but you were told that if a student, I'll call him one of these professional interviews, took you in a direction you want to go, you cut them short. Okay. So you brought them in, and I said, here are the ground rules.
Okay.
This interview is going to be 40 minutes. because I needed 10 minutes to put together my paperwork. And we, because there were two other interviewers interviewing other candidates at the same time, and then we swapped. I said, 40 minutes. I said, my objective is I talk 10 minutes, and 30 minutes of this is your interview. I said, however, I do have certain things I want to get done. And I said, I'm going to pose certain questions to you. And I said, then I'm going to shut up and I'm going to dummy up. And, all the questions were based on the 4 or 5 business practices or competencies that we'd all flagged. Yeah. And the interviewers, we met beforehand to make sure we weren't asking the same questions. Okay. I want you develop your questions to see how this candidate demonstrates these competencies, what they have done. Okay. Not, some warm, fuzzy stuff. What have they done to demonstrate this competency?
So just as an example, if I'm interviewing you and I'm looking for a leadership position, just make up something, right? Yeah. And I say, okay, as a college student, what have you done to demonstrate leadership? Would that be is that how you would go? Something like that?
Yes. Let me tell you, Mr. Mahar, what I've done. I was the newly assigned president of the Men's Intramural Council. I did not have a particularly strong council working for me. So that meant that I had to do things a little faster and smarter to make sure that the intramural program went well. Because whether it happens now at St. Bonaventure, at the end of the intramural season, there was a very large cup that was presented at the end of the athletes' letter award ceremony.
Oh, really?
So it was the last thing. It was a big deal. I mean, it was very competitive.
So you couldn't screw up. Yeah.
So, that's how I would demonstrate, that.
Gotcha. And how, I guess, not having resumes at the time. So what would you look for in a resume, or would they all be like, what percent would be internal hires? Or were you looking at only external hires?
It was mostly internal.
Internal
hires. So the good news of that is I had some performance appraisals.
Okay.
So our performance appraisal, 2 sides. First side is what you did, the numbers. The back side is how you did it. And that ties into the management competencies and business practices. Okay. Again, I would look at that, and sometimes we'd get a resume. But again, I looked at the language in the resume, and I had the benefit of knowing who the raters were. Now, not that anybody inflated appraisals, but there were certain appraisers that inflated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'd look to those, and I talked to people about the rater. And then, and again, I was challenged a number of times by my boss. I would take a candidate for a position that on paper was ranked lower. Okay.
Really?
Because I looked at how he did it
and
how they interviewed.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, there's nothing wrong with being prepared for an interview. But I think assuming you're being interviewed by somebody that knows how to interview, and there's a way of doing that to elicit the right information, you got to follow the cues that person gives you. Because I'll give you an example. I had one interviewer where I just could not get this person on track. And I said, okay, 10 minutes through the interview, I stopped. And I said, all right, this is what we're going to do. And this guy probably thought I had a screw loose. I said, you're going to walk outside my office door. You're going to knock on my door, and we're going to introduce ourselves, and we're going to do a do-over. No, I can't tell you.
Okay, I have to interrupt for a second. Can you imagine being that person and how panicky you'd be? I probably would have just walked away. But anyways, go on.
Well, again, you need to listen to the interviewer's ground rules. Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to talk, but I want you to focus on the things that I'm asking you. Don't take me far afield. Now, I can't tell whether I actually hired this person or not, but that was the only time I, as an interviewer, was inadequate, and I could not get control of the situation, and I couldn't think of anything else to do other than just say,
let's do this over again.
Do over.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead of letting it go and say, I'll just reject the person, let's try it again.
Yeah. So you kept lots of jobs at Exxon, even at the head. So what were your last jobs? Let's do that. What was your last couple of jobs?
The last job, and I held this job both with Mobil and Exxon. I was the crisis management persona for like our North American group.
Okay.
So my job, like it or not, the oil companies handle commodities that are, they're hazardous materials. We try to keep them in the barrel and in the pipeline of the boat, but you have to be prepared just in case. I mean, we were training people for the event we hope never happened.
Sure.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. So that was my job. I carried that for a couple of years, and my job was to train people. And basically, I was a script writer. I had to keep a combination of mobile people, Coast Guard people, environmental people on the same page, working together, because that didn't always happen when you mix regulators with the regulated.
Sure.
My goal was to make sure the exercise ran well, and at the end of the exercise, some admiral, somebody stood up and said, "This was the best training I think my people have ever had."
Wow.
That was the end game on that. Now, when the merger happened with Exxon, number one, we weren't sure we had jobs, but it turned out most of us did. We got called in, me and another person, and said, "All right, we have two jobs, and it's called the Global Emergency Response Advisor. Your job, should you choose or not choose to accept, is to get the whole mobile world on the same page on how we respond, because we want one process, and we want one group of individuals of interchangeable parts, so that if
No matter where it was.
something happens in Asia Pacific,
Wow.
we can move people in for Europe, Africa, or the Middle East." So we ran hard for the first 6 months, and I, as an upstate kid from Rochester, I thought international travel was the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. We'd jump on a plane in Washington Dulles Saturday night, land in Melbourne, Australia Monday, go to work for 3 days there, fly 6 hours to Singapore, do another 2 sessions there, jump on another plane and fly to Malaysia or to China and do the same thing there. And having never dealt with the Asian, type of mindset, I asked for guidance on, how do you behave? And they just said, you tell them what you want. They may not be able to tell you exactly how they're going to get it, but they'll get there. They had these rooms full every exercise,
Really?
every drill. Oh yeah. They did all the legwork, and we just, put on our show, and, everybody declared victory.
So I don't know if you know this even. We started a new program here, Sustainable Equitable Business. Within that class, within that hopefully minor, we want it to be a minor. It's not there yet. But within that, we're going to have a program for disaster management training.
Risk management?
Well, it's more, yes, I'll say risk, but more on the disaster side as well. So like if we are, you're running a business and
Okay.
there's a massive hurricane, or
Mhm.
how do you recover from that? And it sort of dovetails into BonaResponds
Yeah.
as well. Like I have
Yeah.
to admit that. So I guess if you have any suggestions on like, how do you get, if you're a small business owner, and big business, I think they can drive their own ship, but small business owner, like if you're worried about, I don't know, a hurricane or something, how do you talk to, maybe that's not your area,
Okay.
but like, yeah.
All right. Well, tie this into, my job with the oil company was to make sure that we were ready to handle a massive oil spill.
Yeah.
But the process was generic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the assignment, just the final assignment, I think this might help. The final assignment for the class was to imagine a worst case scenario for and they could be their business, their town,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So that's sort of where we came from.
All right. Let me tell you the 3 things. You can make this real simple. People they overcomplicate crisis management or risk management. You need a process. You need a team that's trained. You need a method to manage information. And that's it. That's all you need. Okay. Because we trained years and years and years, for the oil spill that we never had. The only 2 incidents I was involved in were both business crises. Okay.
What were the 2 business crises, if you don't mind?
I got a phone call. There was a gentleman who was on. I was a member of the response team. Okay. My job was logistics. I got a phone call from another logistics manager who was on a team. I was in the downstream. He was in the upstream. And I used to call him Indiana Jones because he worked exploration in some really rough areas.
Okay.
So he calls up and he said, "This is Dr. Jones." I get a message. And he said, "Your mission, should you choose or not choose to accept, is to be into the Dallas-Fort Worth business class lounge on Sunday and such. You will receive further direction when you get there." Now, I thought the guy was kidding. So I called up my friend and he said, "This is the deal. This is why you've been trained. Make us proud." Like they say.
So they didn't tell you what you were going for?
Yeah. When he told me, he said, we've got a business crisis going on in the rainforest.
Okay.
In Peru. So
Okay.
we schedule our flights. We meet in the business class lounge at DFW Airport, and we were told that we're doing some seismic testing, which you do before you do drilling.
Okay.
You do the seismic testing. If it looks like there's something there, then you can drill. Complicating it, we're doing it in the rainforest. So you've got rainforest issues and non-contacted native issues. You've got your environmental contingency stuff that you've signed with the government that you have to behave in a certain manner. So we got our ground rule, and then off we go to Lima, and we meet the people there, and we found out the contractor, the primary contractor who was handling the seismic testing, feeding people, giving them medical, and there were some very rare,
Yeah, sure, I bet in the middle. Yeah,
very diseases in the rain.
right. Yeah.
He was going bankrupt. So the helicopter operators that you needed, the plane operators, the doctors, the people that are doing the seismic, they weren't getting paid, so things were falling apart. Our job was to basically move in and manage the business. Now, granted, we had a very big checkbook because we had Mobil behind us.
Sure.
Okay. So we put together things, and again, I was a logistics manager. The person that ended up as my boss worked for me on the response plan, on the response team. Therefore, but he was the best person to operate as the second in command, giving me direction when I normally gave him direction. But I love it. That's using, it's the old,
that's really cool.
Your organization is probably better than the parts and all everything.
Yeah.
So we went about trying to figure out how we would do this. Okay. And I put on my oil company hat and I said, our helicopters are grounded because they don't get fuel. I said, well, so normally you have to send a truck to a gas station that fills it up and everybody got gas. Well, the logistics were from a little town called Cusco, which is the jumping off the point for Machu Picchu, which is another story. They used to fly bladders over the Andes into the rainforest, and that's what the helicopters would fuel out of. The problem was they used to get 6 days of straight rain when planes couldn't fly. So obviously the management of inventory didn't work good. So I started asking questions like, well, do you have any other storage tanks out there? And they said, yes. I said, well, do you fill them? They said, no. I said, well, how many days of inventory is in the extra tank? Well, they said about a week. I said, well, can we fill that tank up so that when we have these 6 days of rain,
you're covered,
we can, because these helicopters were basically dropping a long line with food and medicine into these little holes in the rainforest so these people would get fed, and the logistics were just difficult, okay?
Yeah, wow.
It was like trains and boats and planes. You had river boats that went up this little river and delivered stuff. So it was difficult, but we finally figured out what was going on. And then for whatever reason, I don't understand, these Peruvian people that were working in the rainforest from all different parts of Peru, they needed to be paid in American dollars. I didn't understand that because there was nothing to buy in the rainforest, but be that as it may. So I said, fine. I talked to a bank and my small American mind says, you go to a bank and I said, I want $100,000.
They didn't have it.
They said, Senor, we can't do that. I said, well, why not? He said, well, we don't have that much cash in one bank. We'll have to get it from 3 or 4 different banks. All right. So we arranged to have the money brought in to the office so we would have it. We could then move it however we moved it. Okay. Well, the money didn't come in when it should have. So it was in the contract.
So just to be sure, everyone listening, we're talking real,
no, this was real world.
The currency, like paper.
Paper.
Okay. Yeah. Nothing wired. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And if you were writing a story, you couldn't have written it like this. Yeah. Okay. This is like right out of Indiana Jones. So the money goes to an office. All right. We come in the next morning, getting ready to we have our morning meeting on what are our objectives? What did we accomplish yesterday? What didn't get accomplished that rolls into the next operational period? This is part of your, crisis management. And where do we go from here? What new stuff? And the leader of the group, this guy I called Indiana Jones, he said, John, we got a problem. I said, what's that? He said, the money got stolen last night. I said, and his name was Joe. I said, Joe, it's difficult enough here without you throwing extra scenarios at me. He said, I'm not kidding. I said, the money got stolen. I go, okay. All right. So that we eventually solved that problem. Problem number 2 was we had a
wait, stop, time out. How did it get stolen? I just have to from the bank?
No, it was from the office. So it was an inside job.
Okay, even better. Okay, great.
And that I just walked away from that and moved on to the next problem. Next problem was getting all these subcontractors, the doctors that inoculated the
Sure.
people from these rare diseases in the rainforest,
Paid up.
and the people that were supplying the food, okay, and the people that were doing, the helicopter operators. It was big bucks. So we needed $500,000. So we called, the mobile headquarters in Virginia, and I said, here's the situation. We had an account set up. We need $500,000 wired into it. Okay. While it gets wired into our account, I'm figuring everything's good. We can start dispersing this, paying all the subcontractors so the business will continue to run.
Right.
Because everybody was threatening to walk away. And again, Murphy jumped in. The Peruvian government called up and said, we've just taken all $500,000 for back taxes not paid by your primary contractor. So I said,
I quit.
you couldn't write the scenario any worse, So it took us about 2 weeks to really get smart on how to deal with everybody down there and how to hedge our bets and all that. So, we had a plan, a 30-day plan, and we were working with the management of this exploration and producing division in Lima. And I said, these are the things that we need to do. We need to accomplish these in 30 days to bring things down to whatever. I said, if we do these things, the prime contractor can continue to operate. If we don't do these things, our recommendation is you terminate the prime contractor, you put this whole thing on hold, do a reassessment, and then in 30 days, decide whether you're going to continue to run this thing and bring in a new contractor to oversee that.
Yeah.
I said, if you don't do these things, everything's going to kind of go south. Or as they say in Europe, it's going to go pear-shaped.
So there's a lot of different conflicts. Not necessarily in our class, what we focus predominantly on are disasters, I think, but there's a lot of, this had nothing to do with.
Well, I mean, there's other situations where, if you're a major plant you're operating a production plant and you lose electricity. Not like St. Bonaventure today that you lost it for 2 hours.
Yeah.
We're talking about you got to relocate your office. You got to relocate your CRTs. You got to relocate where is your money getting transferred to, because people want to get paid. Yeah. So that money's got to go from point A to bank B so that they can disperse that to customers and all that other stuff. Okay. So this whole emergency response process, it's fungible. I mean, like I said, I've never worked on an oil spill. It's been a business crisis or this one I was just talking about, down in Peru.
So I guess you decided to retire early. So just want to quickly, what led you to that decision? And then we're getting to BonaResponds, I promise. But
first of all, I love my job. Yeah. The dealing with the people in the Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, dealing with, I've been exercises in Guam and, Indonesia, in Malaysia, Singapore, Brussels, all over.
Also, I have to do one just because I know the one. Bahamas, you have to right there.
Bahamas,
too, right? Yes, okay.
Bahamas, that was another story in terms of crisis management because I ended up with some medical issues, and I'd committed to run a drill in the Bahamas. So what I did is I reached out. I had everything done and ready to go. I reached out to one of my cohorts who was also retired. I said, I need you to be the man on scene. I'll do all the backroom work, set you up. And I already greased it with the people down there, and they knew this guy and they loved him.
Okay.
So, he handled the Bahamas. Actually, I did all the work, but I managed the crisis properly. Okay.
Yeah. We tried to get him to go to the Bahamas with us. That's how I know that one.
I know.
So, yeah. All right. So you love your work. You love your jobs. You love the people you're working with.
I love my wife. I went home every night. Didn't kick the dog.
Okay, that's good.
My father.
Did the dog bite you?
No, my dog loved me too.
Okay, good.
My father and my wife's father were in failing health. Okay, and they talk about retirement. You always love your job, and you're always getting paid well and all that kind of stuff. But they say there's usually a trigger event.
Yeah.
And I sat with my wife, who I told you was a graduate 2 years after me here. And I said, I don't want to be called home for a funeral. Yeah. As I have too many friends that I know that happened to. I said, so we're going to talk to a complete stranger who calls himself a financial planner. And we're going to see what they say about retiring. And of course, we interviewed 3 or 4 people, settled on somebody that got very good recommendations from other mobile people. And he told me I was crazy to retire. At 56, he said, you're at the peak of your earning years. you're going to take a 20% discount on your retirement. At that time, I could take a lump sum retirement. And he said, can't you work for 2 or 3 more years? I said, no. I said, I'm retiring in the end of September. And this was August. I said, so you figure it out. And I said, how we do this, okay? And of course, I retired in 2006. And all you business people who have read Liar's Poker or the Big Short, you know what happened in 2006 and 7. And back then, we were all in the market. All right, so
Ouch.
yeah. And when you see your retirement going down $30,000 a day, it tends not to make you feel good. We didn't panic. We had some meetings with the money manager, and he said, you got to hang in there. Yeah. And it took us 3 years to, come back. But kind of a side story, this whole thing of, the Big Short, they talked about the Bear Stearns and the Salomons and the Lehman Brothers going down. We were impacted personally by that. We had all our after-tax money that we were living on until I was 59 and a half to avoid the penalty in a fund called the Primary Reserve Fund. It was the one and only money market they called that broke the buck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, during 2007 and 8.
I remember one day, I didn't know the name. Okay, yeah.
All right, so we've got basically 2 years of living in that fund that now becomes an impressed fund because all their money is invested in Lehman Brothers bonds. Okay, Lehman Brothers shuts down. Their bonds are still active, okay? But they're not releasing any money till those bonds mature. They're not selling it at a fire sale.
Right.
All right, so as the bonds matured, we got a little money, okay? Ultimately, over a period of, I think, a year, we got 98% back, which, remember, they broke the buck for 2 cents. And we were lucky that the money manager, he was involved with Royal Bank of Canada. They were the carrier for all our funds. Royal Bank of Canada stepped up and made us whole for 2%. But that was an interesting period in your life when you see all your disposable cash basically locked up.
So I didn't know any of this, just none of this. And
well, that kind of ties in with
but I'm just going to say, like, I'm like almost choked up here. So during this time, I didn't know what was going on. And one of my big themes and everything is we never know what's going on in other people's lives, and like, be kind to everyone, et cetera, et cetera. While this was going on, he was also our biggest donor for BonaResponds. I had no idea that all that other stuff was going on in the background. That's right. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, his name's on the wall out here, et cetera. Like, I had no idea. And like, I thought you were a great guy before. Now you're like,
that was kind of a long story longer, but those were, when you're 56 and you're looking to work till 85, and you see your, not only do you see, I have no money, but you see your retirement fund shrinking in big numbers every day.
So liquidity, and your assets were both dropped. Yeah, wow.
But discussions with the money manager who I trusted, he said, you got to hang in there. And in 3 years, we basically made it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now we're to the point where the money manager will tell you, you ought to be more conservative, which we are. For argument, I'm 75 years old. And in the same token, I said, well, you're really never going to run out of money. So we survived. But we made adjustments after that, instead of being, the old, 70-30 rule on equities versus bonds, now you'd probably say I'm probably dumb. We're probably 10% equities and 90%, a ladder of bonds.
Yeah. Well. Okay, so you retire, and somehow or another you got back with us. So now let's switch gears a little. BonaResponds. So Hurricane Katrina hits 2005. We go down that first fall break trip. We take 7 people down. We have this unbelievable, and there's other podcasts and things if you want to listen to them back, but there's just this unbelievable moment where we're driving in, and I thought, first off, I thought everyone would want to go. I couldn't get anyone to go. Like, I asked my class, I thought no one. We ended up with 7 people, my sister. So we had 8 people go. And we're driving into Biloxi, Mississippi. We're working with, then it's now all hands and hearts. It used to be hands on.
Yeah.
And we drive over the railroad, whatever you want to call it, not trestle, railroad dike. I don't know. You go up and over the railroad crossing. And all of a sudden we're into this area that is just like, where in the world am I? You're met with, National Guard troops checking IDs to let you in. And there's houses are gone, and it was amazing. We decided we have to go back. We have to go back at that moment. And then all of a sudden we meet you. So what leads us to that? What got you on that first big trip,
Mahar,
the March trip of
Mahar,
2006?
you and I have asked this question of each other for years.
But they don't know.
I have no clue how I got in contact with you, much less how I decided to go down. And my wife went down and one of my younger sons went down.
Yeah.
And then he gets in touch with one of his friends and he wants to go and his mother comes down.
Yeah.
She ended up as the cook and
Yeah.
one of the cooks in the, the dining room there where
Yeah.
we stayed. I have no idea why I wanted to go, why I did go. Now, the only thing I would say, I'd done this with high school kids.
Okay.
And we used to take them to someplace. I live in Virginia, so we take them to Georgia or downstate New York, Kentucky,
Yeah.
Tennessee. And you'd work a week, doing challenging things like trying to figure out how to build an 8x10 deck or some stairs or re-roof a small house or something like that. And I guess at a point when without being unchristian, the Catholic Church got a little more sensitive to volunteers around that time. They asked me to sign a hold harmless that when I went down as an adult volunteer. And again, you went to these and it was I'll go back a step. This was a non-denominational Christian work camp, probably 500 people in a camp. And my church maybe was 100 of those. So you had to kind of act as more of as a facilitator. There were multiple jobs on these teams. Somebody made the lunch, somebody got the tools, and you were told as an adult, an alleged adult, to get one of these more menial jobs, not the leader. Okay. So you were there kind of not as a leader. So at night when you had free time, you were kind of like one of the boys or the girls, card games and playing around. So, it was like Vegas, what some things that said in Vegas stayed in Vegas. It was the same thing with these work camps. Not that we were doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But I see my retirement flashing before my eyes and some alleged, because this hold harmless said if there's any allegation of adult malfeasance, the Arlington diocese kind of washes its hands of it. So at that point, I contact somehow Mr. Mahar, and he tells me all these kids are 18 years old. I said, well, what happens if, he says, I send them back freight collect to their parents.
And we did that once.
Yeah. So I said, fine. And that's when we signed on board. And I think we had like 200 and some odd alumni, students.
So
and
the first time we had 287 sign up. One person got sick on the way down and never made it. So we ended up, she had to drive or fly back out of, I don't even know where it was, Memphis, I think, somewhere. So we had 286 people in 5 different areas.
That was huge. That was huge because the whole camp was 500.
Yeah.
If you remember that.
Well, it was multiple camps. Yeah. So and then you kept coming back. So what was it about these trips? And many of, like, right now, I will say, I was thinking we were a few weeks out from graduation, and I was sort of amazed at how few people. Well, we had a good year this year. BonaResponds had a really good year, but how few of the people walking across the stage actually had been on a trip. Yeah. And to me, I don't want to say that's a slap in the face, because they don't know what they're doing or whatever. I don't think it was personal, but like, they're really missing out. Like, what are they missing out? What describe the feeling, the whatever of a trip? What makes trips so great?
I guess, real simple, and maybe, I don't know if you wrote this down or I did, you just, you got this feeling that you've made just a very small piece of the world just a little bit better. Because I remember, that first trip down to Biloxi, they tried to give you a real bad job, and then to give you a good job. Argument's sake, my first day, they slapped a chainsaw on your hand, and you're in this bug-infested park, cutting trees and lugging them up to the top of the street so those big pickers could get them. And you're sweating and you've been eaten up by bugs, and somebody will pull over on the side of the road with 2 bottles of cold water, just some random person.
Best feeling in the world.
And then you go back, you pick up your chainsaw, get eaten up by bugs. And the next day they would send you into the library to sort books to kind of give you a day off. Yeah. The next day you'd be in a warehouse unloading donated
whatever
washing machines or dishwashers or refrigerators. But I did learn one thing, when we got to the point of gutting houses, You do never, ever want to let
Open
a refrigerator that's had food in it for 6 months in salt water open up. You will never do that. You will duct tape that thing shut with a lot of duct tape. You will never let that happen twice.
Completely.
Why I continued, Mahara, I do not know. Other than just, it was because.
And I think we were remiss. I mean, he's saying Anne was with you on almost all of these trips,
Yeah.
and she was spectacular as well. And it is just, I'm going to put my spin on it. I think the one piece he might have missed there was the community, not only making the world a better place, because you do, but like you're also making yourself, like I sometimes say, volunteer and change the world, but also volunteer so the world doesn't change you. It's so easy to become so cynical if you watch the news, if you watch what's going on in the world. Once you meet the people, it's amazing and how different we're all the same underneath. And if a disaster hits whoever, someone in Mississippi, someone in North Carolina, I'm gonna tell a quick story. That's what I do. Sorry, I'm gonna tell a quick story in North Carolina. So we're in North Carolina, and it's after Hurricane Helene this year. So this October of last year, and we're down there, and we're sort of embedded with the volunteer fire department. We're staying with we're eating with them. We're doing everything with the volunteer fire department. And they had a table that was set up, just like these tables, they're fairly long, people sitting on both sides. That was dinner. And I'm sitting one seat away from the head of the fire department, the chief of the fire department. And he's had a tough time. I mean, they've had it horrible. We were there, and I'm going to remember, it's 2.5 weeks out after the storm. The storm was awful. It was fresh. It was raw. And I look over at him one time, and he's crying. And the chief is like down at the end of the thing crying.
Chiefs don't cry.
Chiefs don't cry. And tears were rolling down his eyes. And the person next to me said, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm just so happy." And I'm like, what? He goes, "Look down this table." And he said, "There's people everywhere. You guys are from New York, and we're working with people from Appalachia and, Western North Carolina, and those people are from Oregon. We're all just one big family. This is how it's supposed to be." And it was like goosebumps. Like, I mean, this is like, and that's it. Like, and that the disaster wipes away a lot of those layers. Like you were talking about you in Peru, where your boss was working under you, right?
Yeah.
The same. I have a story. One of my favorite mini stories was in Biloxi. And I don't think it was the first trip. I think, even the big trip, I think it was like several, maybe even the next year. But there was a CEO of a very big investment banking house. I won't say the one, but a very big investment banking house that was working. Now, when you put on a pair of work clothes, you don't know who you are.
No.
Like, there was a college junior from St. Bonaventure giving him orders. He had no idea that he was a CEO of a company.
Mm-hmm.
And there were just like, there are people doing jobs. And it's wonderful. And and the final, I don't want to turn this into a BonaResponds. I do, but I won't.
No.
A BonaResponds podcast. But I think one other thing, and I guess I'm going to add to come back to what you were talking about on. Okay, so Mr. Zimmer, tell me about your leadership abilities. It's awfully difficult, and sometimes if you're coming out without a lot of experience, to tell your leadership, like, what have you done? Like, if you're coming out of college and you weren't involved in clubs, you weren't involved in sports, what do you go to do? If you come out as a BonaResponds leader, you can say, I did this, I created all this. It's a really just easy sell job to say, that can go across whether you're working on Wall Street, whether you're a financial planner dealing with people in their worst time, whether I don't care if you want to be a priest, or whatever it is, you get that experience thrown upon you in disasters.
And you are dealing with people, their worst time.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, and I don't think I've actually talked to you about this. It's sort of become one of my new things on board. What does BonaResponds do? And you do all this stuff. We do, we build ramps, and we build steps, and we do whatever, like all of this. We give food out, we yada, yada, yada. But I think at the very basic thing, if I had to boil it all away, the one thing we do is we bring hope to people when they're needed the most. And it can be just that, hey, someone cares about me when I think the world has forgotten me. And I think that, and all the rest is just details, like how you do it. We've gotten really good at wheelchair ramps, so that's what we specialize in. But I don't think we build wheelchair ramps. I think we build hope by building wheelchair ramps. So
I told you, but before we got conscripted to BonaResponds, I did the
conscript. There's a volunteer group. Anyways,
that's my ex-military background. This high school deal that I work with, the high school work camps.
Yeah.
Part of the quote requirements of the whole process of this, it was called Group Work Camps Incorporated.
Okay.
Bigger nonprofit.
Yeah.
Was to spend time with the residents.
Yeah.
Because you're working on their house. Okay. And you're going to paint a house. You were going to re-roof a garage. You were going to paint the inside. You're going to do something like that, something that you could get done. And the way these things are structured, they had troubleshooters going around. So if you had a problem, they could tell you you really ought to don't worry about pouring footers for this. You're not building the code here.
Yeah.
You're trying to build a deck so this lady can get out in her wheelchair and see the 4th of July fireworks. Okay. So I think I took some of that with us. I saw that in a lot of I'll call it the kids, the students from BonaResponds, while they were busy. And I remember this was one of the Texas trips, mucking out somebody's house that had like 6 inches of mud in it.
Sure.
And then hosing it out and cleaning it out, but taking the time to spend time with the owner and the dog's pet. And then remember, we'd always try to keep the kids from not taking the pets home because we'd want to adopt the pets.
Yes.
But that's another story for another day.
And just, if you're listening, Emma, we're talking about you.
Yeah. So, but again, that was part of the deal. And I don't think that the BonaResponds students had to be taught that.
No.
Like they didn't have to be taught, I really don't want to go in the basement of this soggy house and pull out bad insulation because it's really a bad job. You know me, from my industrial background, I'm probably paranoid.
He's a warrior
on safety.
He's a warrior.
No, we'll call it peace.
Okay. Yeah,
everybody comes home safe.
Right. That's it.
10 fingers,
yes,
10 toe.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
And some of the jobs these kids got into, and just they loved it. I said, my God, I don't think I'd ever consider wanting to be on my back in a crawl space under a house pulling insulation out. But I mean, just and watching how they related to some of the house owners, there were some of these guys grown men were speechless. They couldn't even cry. They were just speechless as these kids just they went about their jobs and did their thing while I was busy being paranoid about safety.
Always. And there's just so many, I will say, and this gets into behavioral finance. So if you're in my behavioral finance class, we're going to talk about this in class, but you couldn't pay me to do these jobs.
No.
Couldn't pay me. I'll do it for free, but you couldn't pay me. At some point, economics breaks down. At some point, it's more about, and that's, I think, what makes the military the military. You're willing to do things for your others that you're not willing to do. If someone said, go under and what price are you going to charge? What am I going to charge to go clean out a house? It's going to be pretty high. I hate it.
Back in the military, I told you, we when I was moved out to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, eventually they built a big cadre around me, and we had some, enlisted people working with us. And the enlisted guys lived on post there. The officers had houses in El Paso or in Las Cruces nearby. So I lived on post. There was a 2-bedroom room, and my roommate was a captain who I knew very well. And I said, it cost us nothing to live here. Now, bearing in mind, we were getting paid I was getting paid $700 a month. But again, there was nothing to spend your money on out there, and you had your quarters and your meals and all that paid for. I said, why don't we just go to the commissary and, we got 40 people. Let's buy 40 T-bone steaks and a whole bunch of stuff and just have a barbecue. And one of the enlisted guys had a barbecue grill at his house. So we did that once. And then we did it again. And we did it again. And the ladies in the commissary said, man, invite me to this, to this barbecue. But I mean, it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, we were buying all this stuff for probably $40, because it was all subsidized there. But it was the idea of, just do it.
All right. So since this is our first actual podcast,
yes.
I'm copying a lot of my favorite podcasts. So we're gonna do a new thing, and he has no idea, like literally none. I'm not even going to say who, but there's some really, really good podcasts out there. And I'm going to pick four of my favorite questions. I'm going to ask these to everyone if I can.
So the pressure's on now.
Okay,
right?
the pressure's on.
Okay.
First one, and we should have done this at the beginning. Tell me a fun fact about yourself that I don't know. A fun fact.
There's a pregnant silence here.
Yeah, there is. There is.
A fun fact.
Fun fact. Something. It could be anything.
Oh, I told you I played baseball here at St. Bonaventure, and I learned how to play baseball at St. Bonaventure, and also my JV baseball coach in high school, who was a St. Bonaventure alum, and they taught me how to coach baseball. And I viewed myself, when my sons were of age, and I had 3 sons, that if I didn't coach, they would be left to the lesser able. So my approach to coaching Little League was that I was coaching preparing the next iteration of Little League coaches.
Oh, really?
And I don't know if parents believe that,
Well,
but that was my routine. Okay. I like coaching kids.
good.
In fact, we talked about all these long distance international trips.
Yeah.
I used to sit with my compatriot that was travel with me, because we were both coaching. We figured out how many games we wouldn't miss during a certain period and practices. That's when we schedule our work.
Wow, interesting. That's cool. I'm an avid reader, so I'm going to have this one, favorite book or current book you are reading
I read The Economist cover to cover every week.
every week.
I try.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm 2 weeks behind now because I've been away from.
Somehow he's going to blame me, just
Yeah.
so you know. It's
Yeah.
not my fault.
So every December they publish a list of their favorite books. So fiction. I went through my fiction period when I was traveling long distance.
Okay.
Clavel and all those characters.
sure.
Okay. No, it's nonfiction. So there was a biography of Navalny, the
Really?
Russian,
The Russian guy. Yeah, yeah.
and it takes you from where he was first poisoned, and he was cured in Berlin.
Yeah, I
And
remember
if
this.
he was smart, he would have stayed in
Stated,
Berlin,
but he didn't. Yes.
didn't.
Yeah.
And it goes through all the different gulags that he was sent through. His biography was pretty good. Read another one. This was kind of a weird one though. It was called The Wide Sea. It's about
The Wide Seed.
yeah, Wide Sea, SEA.
Okay.
It was about Captain Cook's 3rd round-the-world voyage,
Really?
where he had his demise in Hawaii, being bludgeoned to death. But that's something else. No, again, I went into Barnes and Noble the other day because I wanted the Current Economist, and I don't know why these people are still in business. They had like the one 4 weeks old. So I said, well, while I'm here, I look, and I started looking around, and there was a lawyer. His name was Lewis. I never knew of him, but I pulled out a book. It was called The Big Short.
Oh yeah, of course, Michael Lewis.
So I said, and I looked at it and my son had worked for Wachovia Bank during that period, and he ended up overnight working for Wells Fargo during that, collateralized debt obligation and wire loans and stuff like that. So I picked that up, and then I went to pick up his older book. It was called Liar's Poker, which my son said he had read in business school at Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And at which point he said, I lived through that. I don't want to read any more of those stories about that. So those are the 2 I'm working on now. Now, they did not have Liar's Poker, so I like the way the author wrote, so I picked up Moneyball.
Yeah.
You've all seen
Oh,
that
Moneyball's,
movie.
yeah. Very good. Yes. One of my favorites is leave a question for the next guest. So next interview, I will ask this question to them. I don't know who it is yet either. So you have to come up with a question generic enough that anyone can answer.
Because I would ask him, in line with this discussion on crisis management, what are your thoughts on a management process that would work for any type of generic crisis?
For business, for organization, for anything.
We've used them for re-engineerings. We've used them for something as simple as changing accounting programs. If you're going from SAP to something else.
Sure.
Different combinations of.
So what could go wrong, I guess. Is that what you're doing?
And again, what kind of people do you need in the event that you're dealing with that? What kind of people do you have trained on your cadre? Because obviously people you need to handle an oil spill are a little bit people different than you need to
Sure.
handle maybe a business crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
You need more technical specialists, financial types, public affairs types, media people versus, the people that are out there in the blood and the bud and the beer,
Sure. Stopping
cleaning
the,
up stuff.
yeah, yeah. And then final thing, one piece of advice for current students.
I would think, yeah, I know we're all focused on our studies. Yes, hopefully. But there's I tell you, just having gone through an interview process, when I first got my job, I was focused on my marks and my work I'd done in the military. And the first thing that came up was the people that interviewed me went to school at Boston College and Providence, not schools unlike St. Bonaventure. And they explained to me what the job was going to be like, asked me, if I had any questions on it. And then they wanted to talk about St. Bonaventure because they were involved, with athletics at their respective schools during the Lanier years and the Stiff years.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And not that, and I was not trained to interview to refocus an interviewer
Yeah.
when they took me off track, but I kind of followed their lead and wanted to talk about sports
Yeah.
and St. Bonaventure basketball. Not that I think your students should be focused on that, but my point is there are things other than your marks that maybe you got to
Yeah.
demonstrate. And maybe what you're talking about, some of this thing, this empathy that you show for people that, that we helped,
Yeah.
and BonaResponds. And somewhere I think if I were interviewing somebody, I would look to somebody that had these management competencies, but could demonstrate them what they'd done for somebody else. And again, I'm not one of those people that, you need, this 30% of your time on outreach and 10%. I don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to hire the best person. But like I said, how the person presented themselves and how they did it. And I told you a lot of times I would not take the person that in theory was, I'll quote, the political candidate or the higher rated candidate because of how the person presented themselves. Give you an example. I had a conversation with a guy that I hired, this had to be 25 years ago. We had a conversation on his retirement because he called me. And he still remembered that when I read his resume, that his first job was pumping gas at Jim's Shell station in Belmore, New York.
Really?
Yeah. And we still have that conversation. I said, well, anybody that's, that can pump gas, I'm sure they can, negotiate transportation rates.
Of course.
But again, that was just something that,
Yeah.
you normally wouldn't see that on a resume, nor would you see my first job was unloading trucks in the basement of a now defunct store for $1.35 an hour. I really didn't advertise that, but maybe I should have,
Yeah. Well, John, that was a blast. That was just so fun.
That was random.
That was random, but it was fun. Just so we know, we thought we were going to talk for 20 minutes as an hour and 10 in, but yeah. Well, hey, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And I think you kicked this new season of podcasts off spectacularly.
Okay. Thank you for your opportunity,
I just shut it
Dr.
off.
Mahar.
I just shut it off. But there we go. That was great.